We were recording an album with my old band that we had, and we decided we were going to be rock stars and sleep in the studio, which is a terrible idea. And the engineer laughed at us. He was like, "Cool, bye," and left.
What the hell studio lets you do that?
ASC Summit Studios is no longer there, but it was this badass studio in Dallas off of Greenville Avenue, and it was.
And they just casually let you sleep there.
Well, our buddy
Imagine trying to do that at like Warner Brothers. You're like,
no,
hey guys,
like,
I want to try to bring a sleeping bag.
Our buddy was the house engineer, and we were doing our record there, and so we were kind of like recording when they would let us, but we should have been paying like $500 to $800 a day.
That's an amazing rate.
Well, this was like also 2001 or whatever. So
how big a room are we talking?
40 by 40 by 20. Okay, so it was huge. It had 3 echo chambers. Don Henley did stuff there. Overdose for Sticky Fingers was done there, for Rolling Stones. Badass studio. And you could play like a pickup game of basketball in that studio and cut a record. But we had this 13-inch color TV combo VCR. And
high rollers.
Yeah, dude. And our bass player was like...
Half our audience doesn't know what half those
right?
are.
They used to put them in one, kids. Here you go. Here's your birthday present. Now daddy's going to go get drunk.
I don't even understand what it means to watch something that isn't coming through the internet in real time.
I know. What do you mean a hard format? So our bass player was like, dude, we're going to watch Vanilla Sky. Everybody else passes out. I stay awake watching this thing on like a 13-inch TV, and I was blown away. I was like, I didn't know that Tom Cruise was a good actor. I just thought he was, and he's phenomenal. He's phenomenal.
Very
in this
good.
movie.
No, he is.
I have this thought that the only reason that Tom Cruise gets away with the Scientology thing, which I feel like most people feel negatively about, is because he's a very good actor and everyone always says he's brilliant to work with. Like, so long as you show up and you do your job well, people will forgive quite a bit, I think.
He comes across as just a very driven bloke.
Seems
right?
that way.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. It's not just that I hear he's great to work with, but he is, the hardest working person on the production by all reputation.
Yeah.
It's like, not to mention just the spectacle of like finding new ways to put himself in precarious danger with every new film. But like always, showing up early and leaving late and hustling. I always hear about it. I feel like I probably have told this story here, but when friends of mine were working with Michael Giacchino on the J.J. Abrams Mission Impossible 3.
It was MI3. I didn't realize that. I knew it was one of those, but I couldn't remember which one it was. I love the story. So shut up.
little
I know where we're
commentary
going.
track.
That's a lot of enthusiasm there, Troy.
I love the story.
It was just that he came to all the recording sessions. You might be thinking of a different story that is from him working with Hans Zimmer on Mission Impossible 2, which is a story much more about Hans Zimmer than it is about Tom Cruise. But the Giacchino one was that he came to the orchestra sessions and was like, I want to try conducting the orchestra, and so they and the funny thing is the Mission Impossible theme is famously in 5/4.
You can't not play it, Austin. Come on now. You know what your role is.
How do you even know where the keyboard is behind you to be able to do that? Like, I just don't get it.
That's day one of music school. Alanah is first
over the shoulder.
Find the keyboard.
No, that theme, it's in 5 for those unfamiliar, very famously so. If most music is 1, 2, 3, 4, that one has the extra beat. Da 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 da.
Quick question as a sidebar.
That's what makes it feel like it's chasing. It's racing. It's trying to get ahead.
Was that Carol Kaye that wrote that line?
What line?
The bass line. Or at least played bass on that. If you don't, I'm going to put a pin in this. Carol Kaye will come back to it. Please continue your story.
I don't actually remember who the original. I assume it was just LA studio musicians. Lalo Schifrin wrote the theme and scored the show. He was sort of like the definitive composer of the 70s and 60s. It's just that sound.
I mean, he composed it, but Limp Bizkit really knocked it out of the park, didn't
No,
it? That was the moment where it really came
to
to
We can all agree on that.
I'm pretty sure it was Carol Kaye, but go ahead.
Well, in any case, so because it's in 5, it's a little bit harder to conduct. You basically have to you have to count to 5, and that's, it's a stretch. And so the funny thing is they made a diagram for Mr. Cruise to conduct, like with the description of what the physical pattern is for conducting in 5. And they were like, just, try to move your arms like this. Like, there's no sheet music, of course, it's pointless, but they're like, just move your hands this way. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, sure. And so he gets up, and it's not easy, and especially there's a 100-piece orchestra sitting there.
Ask is like, I'll let you finish this story, but I'd love to hear you talk about, like, how do you learn to be a conductor?
Oh, that's a whole other, yeah, for sure. And certainly
on the next episode of Play, Watch, Listen.
You forget your instrument and they make you do it. That's how it works.
I can tell you the most intimidating way to learn is in a 100-piece orchestra, Hollywood studio orchestra, with every musician being paid full scale. Or more on a giant $100 million Hollywood production.
Is that how you learned? No, that's Tom Cruise.
That's how Tom Cruise learned.
And, he's back.
We are confused regularly, but no. So anyway, what's so funny is I have a friend who, I wasn't there, but I have a friend who was there and filmed it on his phone and showed me the footage. And what was funny about it was that Tom Cruise, he's basically suffering immensely. Like, he can't conduct for shit. And it's hard. It's already a difficult piece to conduct. Like, you would have sympathy for struggling anyway. But what's great is that, these Hollywood studio orchestras are just so unbelievable that if you close your eyes and listen, you're like, that's a 100% perfect take. Like, just completely in spite of him, the orchestra, like, he's just wherever he is.
Don't watch the short, dude.
Yeah, and you just hear this, you hear this giant rum, bum, 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 bum. So what was cool is that after that, he arranged, they did like a big catering thing where, it was like on the studio lot, the big giant meal and desserts and stuff show up. Big giant craft services thing shows up to take care of the musicians. And then they did this wasn't that common. It's starting to become a little more common. And he and J.J. Abrams may have been kind of the tipping point, because I never heard of this, at least much prior to this. But when the movie was finished, they arranged a special screening for only the orchestra and their families to see the film. And usually the orchestra is just forgotten instantly, even a huge one, and even on a thing where music's very important. It's like the premiere is for the stars, the premiere is for the director and the producers and, their fancy friends and things like that. And fair enough, there's only so many people you can fit even in a huge theater. But they arranged a special screening for just the orchestra and their families on that movie, which
really
I thought
cool.
was
nice.
And I think J.J. Abrams has done that. I think he's done that pretty consistently since then.
That's really nice. I mean, it is a really significant part of everything, and people so often let it go. But I was going to ask, if Tom Cruise were not conducting, / if there is an orchestra with no conductor, would they still be able to play a song if they know it? Or is it like super important in that regard?
So, there is such a thing as conductorless orchestras. They tend to be very small, because part of the reason why you need a conductor is that historically, in the the Baroque and classical eras of music. So we're talking about, the tail end of the 16th century up to the mid 18th century. Orchestras were still 20, 30 people. So everyone was sitting pretty close together. And so very often the concertmaster, which is the first violin, would be the sort of conductor. And also the music tended to be written in a way where everybody was playing, for the most part, all the time, which meant that everybody's listening off of each other and kind of getting in the groove and doing their thing. As orchestral music started to develop more and more and become, new instruments started to be invented, new the concert venues moved out of the kind of chamber parlor and the churches in which they were traditionally being done, and concert halls started to become a thing. Then you started to enter into this interesting challenge where the orchestra was so large that the time delay from musicians hearing each other across the orchestra was enough that they could never really play together very well.
No way.
Yeah, like there would be it would sound like they're sloppy. Like they obviously the speed of sound is quite fast, but it's not fast enough. And on top of that, it gets muddied. Like, have you ever been on a stage where you're like introducing your, I'm sure you've been on plenty of stages where you're like presenting an award or whatever, or you're giving a speech, and you're hearing the slap back of your own voice off the back wall through the speakers, and how it's really hard to focus and it's really hard to pay attention when you're getting that feedback. Well, it's essentially the same phenomenon for orchestras where they're only reliant on their ears to really stay together, where you're not getting the sound, you're getting the reflection of the sound, and it's not quite in sync with the source point of the sound. So
I actually wonder if that's more to do with reaction times rather than like the speed of sound, right? Because it's actually you're waiting for someone to hear and process. Here we are, we're in my territory now. There's like a millisecond delay between a sound coming into your ear and you knowing it's there. So if you multiply that by hundreds of people, that makes sense. That's slower than the speed of sound, that transition in the brain. Yeah, the
two combined start to really make it unfeasible, infeasible.
Makes sense.
And so I think the early days of conducting, like there was a very famous French conductor named Lully, who he had a giant staff and he would just pound the beat like Gandalf.
God damn it, Lully, you and that stick.
Here's the best part. Lully is, I think, the only conductor who has ever died in the line of duty because he stabbed himself in the foot during a concert and got gangrene and died.
Oh my God.
On the spot?
Well, I don't think it works quite that fast.
I didn't think so either. It's like he didn't die in the line of duty. He just had a stupid accident and suffered for a couple of weeks.
He was injured. He fell in the line of duty.
Yeah.
He was hurt.
Respectful of the guy we just learned.
We don't say if a soldier takes a few hours back to the field hospital. We still say they died on the battlefield, right?
Yeah,
he stabbed himself in the foot. He's going to die. I think we can just put some Bactine or something. We haven't invented Bactine yet. He's going to die.
Yep.
Sorry for you. It is a great concert, so don't worry.
It's still sad.
Can I please, I want to point out, first of all, two things.
Yeah.
I am the dumbest person on this podcast. I just want to point that is a resounding truth. There's so many conversations where I'm like, I think I'm a fairly intellectual person.
I'm
a fairly intellectual person.
Actually.
I'm one of those intellectuals.
Man, and then I hear you guys and I go, man, I'm the dumbest person on this podcast. Okay, but I would love to point out a specific person because a lot of people don't even know this person exists. Kaye, born March 24th, 1935. I was correct. She did play on that. She did stuff with Schifrin, in addition to stuff with Phil Spector, Brian Wilson, Quincy Jones. She is the most recorded session musician in history. Is she
part of the Wrecking Crew? Is she in that?
She's part of the Wrecking Crew.
Women can't play instruments.
Dude, there's a whole documentary.
It's very political when they do, yeah. It's very political when women play instruments.
Take politics out of my music.
Why do people keep inserting that into our music? I remember when music was apolitical.
Exactly.
Don't bring me your diversity wokeness in 1957. Basically everything that's ever had like, oh, that's badass bass line, Kaye played it. Like going back to like, I think it was not Satisfaction, but like Beach Boys. She played on Beach Boys records. She's incredible. That's for stuff Brian Wilson. I think it was Good Vibration. I think she played that. I was just talking
about Good Vibrations last night. How if you saw the movie Love and Mercy with Paul Dano as Brian Wilson, where there's a scene where they're
really.
Have you seen that movie?
I actually haven't. No.
I'm a little hurt.
It's
other than Tribeca.
It is.
I'm literally sitting right here.
It's okay. It's just now we've got your version of Hotline Miami. We're just gonna roll with that. So it's.
It's not Greg Miller anymore.
No, Greg Miller is Mike's favorite. You get to have a separate.
Man, I had to pay off some people at BAFTA, so that guy didn't get nominated.
That scene. Go watch that scene in Love and Mercy of them recording Good Vibrations, because what's cool is it's not really dramatized for the sake of the movie. Like, it's pretty accurate to how they surely did it. It's certainly, I don't know the specifics of how they worked, but it's certainly accurate to the way records were made and are made by and large still. It's an awesome scene, especially because it's all about Brian Wilson and his kind of neurotic obsessiveness. And they like yell at him. They're like, the cellists have been playing for 3 hours, and he's like, it's not done. And it's like, and part of me looks at that and it's like, I admire the insane brilliance, but then I also think about the cellists, and I'm like,
No, we don't support that.
yeah, I remember witnessing. I feel like it's not throwing anyone under the bus to tell this story, but I remember once walking into a coffee shop, and I ran into some LA musician friends, and I was like, how you guys doing? And they were like, oh man, it's one of those days. And it turns out they had been coming from the session to The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, and it's an unbelievably beautiful score. Like, it was Oscar nominated. It lost to The Social Network. No, sorry. What did it lose to? King's Speech lost to The Social Network. Different Desplat score. Can't remember what it lost to off the top of my head, but it was. I thought it was the best score that year. It was Desplat and peak form, just so excellent, and but he was famously, like, word got around of how just those sessions were just like what I was describing just a second ago. There's a cue where a harpist, well, her name doesn't matter. There's a harpist, there's a well-known harpist in LA.
Disagree?
Well, what I mean is, like, I don't want to single out.
Only to them it matters.
In case, you know what I mean. In context, that's a great one to clip out of context. I don't know how public this information is, and there's a number of harpists this could theoretically be. There's a long, beautiful, extended solo, but they had this, 80 plus piece orchestra sitting there. And, but there's this unaccompanied, very exposed harp solo. And he made her, normally if you have a solo like this that you're going to want to scrutinize, you would book it on a separate session, because you have 80 musicians sitting there doing nothing. And if you're going
to do so, right?
And, yeah, exactly. So you got producers saying, why are we paying all these people to do nothing? But then also it's just evil to subject people to sit there to boredom like that. To me, there's just no purpose. If I'm a musician, I want to play. And so you book your sessions to efficiently use people's time. And if you don't need the full orchestra, that's why we get into this whole world of the A group, the B group, the C group, where if you know that 10% of your cues are going to be only, half the orchestra, you book those on a separate day with half-sized group, so that you can really efficiently use everybody's time. And obviously it saves money in the process. So they didn't do that. It was basically just everybody shows up for every day of sessions. And most of the sessions used enough of the orchestra that it made sense and it was fine. But there's this one passage that he made her do like 2 hours of this cue, and just with everyone sitting there. And all these musicians were so like...
What would that do to your fingers over time? Like, can you get musician injuries? I imagine you can.
I mean, part of it was that it's actually very delicate. So it was, it's a very quiet, but he was getting real, harp is famously difficult to keep in tune, and it also just is it takes like all day to even tune the thing, because it's like, all the strings in a piano. Imagine every time you sat down to play, you had to get out your little toolkit of tuning pegs. And I mean, there's just harp is one of those instruments that it's like begging not to exist. It's such a high maintenance.
This sounds like the original pitch for Whiplash, by the way, and some writer came in and punched it up.
Just made it more dramatic.
What if it's not cool? What's cool?
What if it's a drummer?
I'm taking that as feedback on the concision of my delivery.
Oh no, what we do is we get J.K. Simmons instead, and he's like, we're gonna make him ripped. for
how
no
insane!
Reason.
How insane!
They Hollywoodified the story about the overworked harpist for sure. That's what happened here.
Two random trivia about that film. How insane! First off, that Damien Chazelle was in like his mid-20s when he made that movie, which is to me that's just bonkers. But also the funny little random thing that the girlfriend he breaks up with is Supergirl, and that makes me laugh. That he,
isn't it?
How about
I not made that link?
Yeah,
the fact that it's shot 90% in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I mean it's like Friends and Seinfeld,
Yeah, but Carnegie Hall. There's so many exteriors of New York. They sell it as New York. He's going to whatever school in New York. It's not NYU, but
Isn't he
and
Juilliard?
they shot all of those in I think they shot all their exteriors in like one day. They just guerrillaed their shots.
That's actually
to close down New York.
Yeah,
to
the shooting
get shots like that. That's got to be hard. But Manhattan
And LA,
expensive.
same thing.
That's true.
I remember when I was
Most
living in New
cities.
York, they were shooting the Tom Tykwer movie, The International, I think it's called, with Nicole Kidman. It's kind of a spy thriller. I think that's what it's called. But they were shooting that on my street. I remember thinking, they have to block the streets, which means there's police barricades and police cars. And then it was a night shot, so they've got all these big cranes with the floodlights.
Godlights.
Yep. And it takes hours to set all that up. They've got their generators, the craft services. They've got all the various trailers for, Nicole Kidman and the other, the director and whomever. And it's a shot of her. I was watching, it was right outside my apartment. I was literally just watching her do this over and over again of just, all right, start at the end. Okay, walk towards camera. Okay, cut, let's reset, do it again. It's just like, and you think just the permitting to shoot, this was in the East Village. Like, this is not some off the beaten path, hidden little corner of New York. Like, it's the heart of the city. And it's like, just for a shot, you could have done this on the Warner lot on their fake New York, and it would look indifferentiable from that. But the rest of that, there's a famous shot in that movie where they're running up the circular interior of the Guggenheim. So it's like, it's a New York movie, and they just committed fully. It's also not a low budget movie, but I just remember thinking all this work. I mean, this is probably like $100,000 that I'm looking at right here for a shot of her walking down the street. Never mind what she's being paid and whatever,
It's
but
wild.
just the setup to get people there and to block the streets and like impede people's lives. Like she's walking past people's actual front door that they, I guess, just can't come out of for the next hour or something. Like it's baffling to me. New York seems like more trouble than it's worth. If I
I've
was
done
to
Shout
a few
outs.
set
Go ahead.
visits, and I did one for Venom that was on what they call Bullet Hill in San Francisco. It was for some of the stunts.
The movie
It's like
Bullet.
a very cool stunt, but the way that they dealt with that one was really unique because of the time of day. It's exactly that hill that's like super bouncy.
By the way, it's Naomi Watts. I apparently all blonde actresses look the same to me. So Nicole
Kim is a
Kidman.
redhead.
Oh, you're right.
Both
So
Australian.
apparently all women
all
look
right.
the same to me.
White girls, it's whatever, you know.
Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently I just don't see
basically-
faces.
Just hair. Well, but it's not even the color of it.
Yeah, no,
It's just that she's a woman, actually.
That's the thing. I have
Sorry,
literally
it was Tom
no.
Hardy. My apologies.
Yeah, exactly. It was Vin
He
Diesel.
played an Australian kind of once in a thing.
He's sort of blonde. I don't know.
Go ahead.
There's no version of this that looks good for me. I
Venom.
literally
You were on the set of Venom.
was on the set
Literally-
of Venom.
Yeah.
And basically what they did for that, like it started raining at one point and people started just coming out, I guess. I don't really remember why people started coming out on the street or people were trying to watch, but just constantly people have like, you have to get back in your house. And they're like, but I pay rent here. What do you mean I have to get, I could walk down the street. You're like, no, and they would, like people would eventually leave, but they have no legal right to actually tell people to stay inside their homes because they aren't police. So it's
Yeah.
basically just a set overtakes the street. It has permission from the city to do so, to shut the street down, and then they just have to tell anyone who wants to leave their house that they have to leave. Like often they'll not in the middle of a take, but while they're resetting they'll let people come out and move around if they need to. But it was pretty wild to watch. Like I was like, I don't understand how you're going to manage this when
They
the city's
do-
so small
and
and there's
if-
so many people in it.
If I may, I dated a girl who was a PA, and if you do happen to live in, especially Los Angeles or New York, if you live in Atlanta, if you live in a place where they have a tendency to film, understand this. Those people that are telling you, please wait, or they're locking the street down, that's their responsibility. Those are typically first in, last out, least paid, most worked people on the set, and they're just trying to do their job.
Yeah.
Please don't yell at them. Please don't take out your frustration on them. They have zero agency or any kind of authority to change anything about what they're doing. They're just trying to do their job. I've seen people just screaming at a PA, and that's kind of like their job, is to just get screamed at. That's what they do.
If
But
you
they're
see
gonna get
Troy filming on your street,
Go ahead.
yell abuse at him.
Fucking
Just
yell at me.
Screech out the window at him. Yeah,
You
absolutely.
sucked.
Yeah,
Sucked in past tense?
Thank you for
Not currently
watching.
though. You're great right
Your
now.
work is improving steadily over time, and it's been a joy to watch.
Can I ask you questions about The Last of Us Part 2? Are you rolling? Oh, wait.
I have to say I do love those those crew members in those kinds of roles that are like they're in their 50s and they've worked on 1,000 movies and they're all like, I love like the carpentry, like the production design department types that are
Seen some shit, man.
Yeah, exactly. They all have that vibe that everyone I've interacted with has always been like, they always have the carpenter's tool belt. They're walking in, they're like, hey Bill, remember when we did that picture down in down the Bay Area? And it's like everything feels like these war stories. It's like,
You mean The Godfather?
They've seen it all.
I was on that
What
Venom
was that
set for
movie
one
called?
night, and they were like talking about all of these blockbuster films that had terrible experience. And I was the only journalist on set. I was like, "Do we want to be doing? Okay, I guess we're doing it." They didn't care at all.
Yeah, pretty much they're just like, hey, you want us to ruin any movie for you? Let's have a conversation about it.
I heard a
They
bunch
can
of stuff
tell
about
you.
The Dark Knight. Like there was just tons of stuff that they were just like laying on me, and I was like, I guess I'll take it. So I didn't report on any
One
of them,
conversation did its best to ruin Dark Knight for me. One conversation with somebody, and it was a writer. And he said, explain to me the scene where they go in to the stock market, right?
Yes, you're thinking of the stock market is in Rise.
Third one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. That one, third one. When does the stock market open? Time of day. Morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
The whole thing
That
happens.
movie about the man dressed as the bat was ridiculous. I've just realised.
But they come out and it's night.
Yeah.
And the whole reason why they did that scene was to set up the thing, the bat glider, the bat plane. That's it.
My biggest beef with that scene is how
I
did
am.
they get the scooters inside the stock market? It doesn't make any sense.
There's a lot about that where I feel like Christopher Nolan, who's clearly a great filmmaker, great writer, Jonathan Nolan especially is a great writer, just kind of like, I don't know, man. It was just convoluted. And
You ever watch
serving
you ever
masters.
watch the movie pitches on Screen Rant?
Yeah.
Where they always ask a question like that. So wait, why are they going in the stock market first thing in the morning and then coming
I don't
out
know.
and it's night? And he goes, so the
Okay.
movie can happen.
I think you sent us the Soul on Austin. They're so good. They're really well made.
That guy, and not just hilarious, like his comic delivery. I just love the wow,
Okay,
wow,
so
wow.
we're just going to go ahead and do that.
Okay.
then.
It's
great.
so funny, but it's also unbelievably insightful,
Yeah.
like critique that
Yeah.
from a writing sort of integrity, like the architecture of these stories where they.
Also, I've met execs that speak like that, right?
Yeah,
like, that's
sure, yeah.
There's definitely people around.
There are some things
have
that
that
like people will say on creative projects that are like so bizarre that it fits those things. Like some of the scripted stuff I've worked on, sometimes it's been like, well, but this is what the audience expects.
How do
So
you
we
know?
need to do this. You'd be like, what? Why? What does that even mean? But okay, I guess. Like, the audience is expecting this kind of thing, so we want to play into that. Why? Why would you ever want to play into what you think people you don't know expect? It's just there's some weird feedback. You're like, okay, I guess. Like, that's
Mike,
what
you have to
wanna
deal
do.
with that though, right? That's like you have to.
I love
Always
working with every partner I've ever had. I think they're all brilliant. And it's been
No.
an amazing creative
I'm saying like as far
experience.
as like meeting up with player expectation, right? So you
Oh,
have
right,
to.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is that?
Well, that's
but-
where. Well, there's difference. So games are interesting and unique. Oh, here we go. This is my pretentious moment for the show.
The podcast is starting.
The thing about
I'm not
video
recording, by the way.
games-
Should I be recording?
This is gold. We backups to this.
I'm now recording, by the way.
Games are interesting in that they're one of the few areas of design where your objective is not necessarily to give people what they want. Most design is about tailoring an experience to be perfect and, get out the user's way, give them what they need right now. It's a really interesting intersection between design and art, right? Because art is meant to challenge you. Art is meant to, not give you what you want. It's meant to entertain you by withholding what you want. Games are an interesting kind of middle ground because I would agree that, like, in terms of, like, what button should we put jump on, that should probably be on the button that players expect and, what the genre and industry does. But in terms of, like, what you're doing in terms of creative choices, you want to surprise them. You want to do something different and bold. So it's a really weird... There's a lot of conversations in games development that are kind of, where do we want to be on that line? Because we can give them exactly what they want, and technically that would be excellent design. Or we can give them something that's mind-blowingly weird and they'll never know what's going on. It's going to be a nightmare to teach them anything. And that's art. And we kind of have to kind of straddle the two and kind of pick a path through that.
So do you think design should meet expectation by and large? That the holding off the expectation, being withholding, should come from more narrative, more artistic, and that...
Oh, no, I think you can do whatever. Like, if you look at like something like Dark Souls, that's a brilliant example of a game that's like intentionally obtuse with its design in a lot of places, but because it's so fundamentally fair with its other systems. You don't agree with that, Alanah?
I don't know that I would call Dark Souls intentionally obtuse. Like, I don't know that that's the correct descriptor of what, you know, the
it might be
Souls
too
want to
loaded a
try
word,
and
in
do.
fairness. Yeah, obtuse might be. I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't play itself, right? It doesn't give you it's not an easy game in that sense.
Yeah, but it is still a system that you can learn and finesse. So it's not
Sure.
like it's
But
trying
good
to throw
design,
players out.
there's an argument that like good design takes less learning. And again, this is all like objective. All subjective, and all ultimately with games. What's interesting is you break all these rules all the time. But if you think about any other product in your life, if I said to you, I've got this new phone and it's excellent. I mean, it's going to take you a few weeks to figure it out, but once
Never.
you do, it's going to be the best game. It's the best phone you've ever had.
That's the conversation of this game gets good, but you have to put in 30 hours.
Sure, but what's interesting with games, isn't it interesting that games actually that is a valid argument. Dark Souls is an excellent game. It just takes a lot of work, and it's weird that that's something that's unique to games. I think rather than even
No,
film
The Wire
and television.
did the same thing though too. The Wire was like, listen, this
Sure,
show's going to
true.
pay off, but you have to. It's going to be season 2. It's like, well, what the fuck am I going to do for 12 hours?
So what's interesting with that and with TV and film, and I actually had this conversation with someone quite recently. With film or television, there's a lot of stuff you can lean on. You know that the person who's going to watch your show knows to sit on the sofa, knows to turn on the TV, go to your show, watch for an hour. So it's with games we have to make the movie, but we also have to build the theater and tell you how to use it. Like we have to kind of create all of this design that gets you to the content, and that's a real challenge. The Wire is excellent, but The Wire expects a lot from its audience, but it also can rely on the fact that you've seen procedural cop shows before, so it can use certain tropes, certain characters.
But it's also the
kinda get you in there.
anti-procedural, though.
It is, but it definitely knows that you've seen those movies and TV
So
shows.
yeah,
It
it's
definitely
using that
frames
language.
Yeah,
But it's juxtaposing it with.
it's a subversion. It's not an invention. It's kind of it's playing with that.
I don't know what it looks like. Like we're going through West Wing right now, and I don't
I
think...
won't make the joke that we had to cut last time again. I'll be good.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Watching that, there's so much about it that tells that it's of a time, but I was thinking about this last night as we're watching the season 1 finale, and it's just, the pace of it is just incredible. But even in that, like, ratcheting up the tension the entire time, I think I found myself going, every once in a while, just going, and just checking, because there was something that was happening on screen that wasn't immediately captivating me. I could kind of like tune into it on a subconscious level and still take it in. And it made me wonder, is like, have we changed the way that we, right? Are we creating content in different ways because we're now competing? It's not just like you said, The Wire it was predicated upon a language that people understood, the Law and Order, the procedural, the Hill Street Blues, all of that, NYPD Blue. But this is like, we don't do that anymore because they're constantly going, hey.
Meanwhile, the Snyder Cut is 4 hours long. But I was going to say...
Good? Apparently it's good. The Rotten Tomatoes. Someone sent me a
supposedly.
screenshot of the Rotten Tomato. Yeah,
I'm definitely going to watch it.
good.
I'm very curious. I have no idea. I think it seems like it's good because it includes a bunch of setup for the characters that otherwise were not included, like almost like it has their own mini-movies inside of it. I'm not sure, though. But I was going to say, I feel like when I saw Suicide Squad, which is a movie that I couldn't stand, it felt to me when I walked out, and I was trying to think, because I didn't even finish it. I literally walked out of the theater and went and saw a different movie instead. I was
I've
trying to
ever
think
done
about
that once in my life.
That's also the
Walked out
only
of a
time that I've
theater?
ever done it.
Yeah, I can't think if I've
Suicide
ever thought I just have to be somewhere else.
I walked out of Say Anything, but that's because I went to chase a girl because she was sitting next to me, and I was like, we had talked. I was like, you want to get out of here? Anyway, continue.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant you literally chased a woman out of the theater, and I was like, we should address this.
No,
This
she was
seems
like, let's
bad.
get out of here. And I was like John Cusack just did it for her, I guess. So I was like, yeah. I want to get whatever you want to be.
Great. Suicide Squad.
I
not
love
quite
that
the
you're.
case for
I
me.
love that you're completely like she's super excited by this other guy, and you're like,
I'll take it.
I will
can
be
work-
John Cusack for you.
I can
You
work with that.
understand?
Yeah.
I will be that for you. I'm 14. Please, if my game is being that dude, fine, by all means,
Sign me
go
up.
for it.
Suicide Squad felt to me, and I have no idea if this is the case, but it felt like a result of TikTok. It's a movie that characters often rarely even properly interact with each other. It hard cuts
do you know
between
the
shit
actual
all the
story?
time.
Do you actually know? Do you know the actual story of? Because you're not
Completely
far
uninformed,
off.
just an opinion.
So what they did, so I mean, obviously you've always got to take everything with a pinch of salt. The version I've heard is that they made the movie, shot the movie, did the movie, and then they had they had a very successful trailer that was produced, like the first announced for it. Everyone loved that trailer. The film studio then got the trailer house who'd done the trailer to re-edit the entire movie.
What?
So a lot of the stuff in there, apparently there's, I think that's the new one that the guys who, the fans who've gotten the Snyder cut released are now like demanding the Suicide Squad cut, right? Because essentially that was kind of butchered together in that kind of trailer aesthetic. So it's exactly what you're saying. They kind
That's
of
true. It makes sense.
trailered it up and basically made an hour-and-a-half trailer for a movie in
They
itself,
really
which
did.
is kind of what that film
it's
is.
so
right?
disjointed and it's really fast. But I can understand an audience I can understand younger people really liking that. And I like a slow movie. I like The Irishman the whole way through. I'm getting old.
This, by the way, is totally what older people said about like MTV-ification of movies when we were kids,
So
right?
that's
I'm not
absolutely
talking
what it
shit
is.
about it. I'm just
Is this
saying.
the death? Is this the death of cinema, or is it the evolution thereof? Seriously, like, is it?
Cinema
is it
will
like,
never
hey,
die. It's going to keep evolving. Yeah.
So this is an evolution of it. It's not something that we should fight. It's just something that's like, this is where we're at. This is art should play to the zeitgeist, therefore, so it could be consumed by it. I don't believe that art should always hover above. I believe that it should make people look up, but I don't think this should be out of reach for people. That to me is not art. That's masturbation. That's you doing something creative for your own self. But if you want to say something to the world, you better be able to say
I
it
make
in a way
indie
that people
games,
can
Troy.
receive it.
It's all masturbatory. What are you
What's
talking
your problem with masturbation?
Ah.
I think that I would like a place for all of those things to exist. Like, I feel like it's not like I want all art to move in one direction and all films to move in the same direction. I would just
Absolutely.
welcome more different kinds of them, basically.
Sure. Like I Lars Van Trier, sure, all day long. Make me think, be esoteric, totally fine. But at the same time, I do want Lars Van Trier is making a movie for Lars Van Trier. He's not making movies. He's making movies to be a commentary on something, and he doesn't care if you figure it out. This is a whole separate conversation. Rod Serling did a whole thing about this. About Austin, you want to say something?
oh, I've been racking
petered
up.
out there
I've been
at the
racking up thoughts.
You lost
for
the
the
wind
last,
as it went on. Yeah.
I've been trying to keep all the thoughts, all the reactions in my head straight.
Just like exit ramps off the freeway. You're like, shit, I got to double back.
Yeah, no, for real. There's a few that I'm like, I think that one's a lost cause. But because probably 10 minutes ago, Mike, you made this kind of declaration that art is sort of, it is designed to challenge you. You kind of framed art as that's what art is, or how I define art. That's
a very personal. I'm sure lots of people would have different opinions, but that's my take on it. Yeah.
That was why I wanted to ask. I wanted to pick at that a little bit because
Fight.
No, I'm not.
I really
I'm not,
wanted to talk about Xbox Bethesda today. I did the background and I was so hopeful. I was like, it's Skyrim. We're going to talk about this.
We can do it. We can do it.
Oh, go ahead.
Austin challenged me. Debate me.
I don't know that I have a challenge to it. I just wanted to poke at it to see, because I think it's an interesting notion that art is that there's a presupposition of it being challenging to be art, and so then the question becomes, okay, let's take something.
I would say to be good art, it should be challenging. I think everything's art. I'm definitely one of those pretentious gits who thinks this glass is art. If we say it's art, like I think art, it's
See,
bad
I tend
art,
to
but it's
agree
art.
with that. I tend to be on the
So
same.
I would say I would qualify that as I think good art is generally challenging.
What do you
yes.
mean by challenging then? I made a short film this weekend.
I'm
and-
so proud of you for that, by the
Well
way. I
done.
saw that. Fucking kick ass.
Thank you. It was really fun. Very short, very simple for my first one. It was very easy. But I did that intentionally. But
You
I
didn't
would say
block
it
out
is
Manhattan and have
exactly.
Naomi,
Yeah, $100,000.
That was you.
It cost me like $2,000 in total for the whole thing. But
That was Alanah outside your window. You just can't tell blonde Australians
can't tell women apart.
apart.
Could be a red eye, I don't know.
Is that Nicole Kidman? Is that Naomi Watts? Oh my God, it's Alanah Pearce.
It is definitely an accurate expression of something, and my intention is to express something. But I am not trying to challenge people with my expression. I am just trying to express it. Would it be challenging in that it is showing people that expression? Like, how do you define challenging?
I think my definition of challenging is probably quite broad, because I think if you're expressing something personal to another party and asking them to listen, there is, to me, an element of challenge in that you are you're challenging them to join you in your world. Yeah, no, it's not. I'm not saying every piece of art needs to be like a punk punch in the face. But I think art generally should, by the virtue, I think it's arrogant. There's a degree of kind of arrogant defiance to creating anything and expecting anyone else to be interested in it. So by definition, there's kind of a combative element to the production of art. Design, I would say, is more about industrial design, or just design in general, is more about making people comfortable and about providing that space for someone else. I guess the difference is art generally centers the artist and what they're trying to say and how they're trying to challenge an audience. You're going into their place, whereas design is if I'm making art, I'm coming to you and I'm telling you what I'm doing. If I'm making design, I'm welcoming you in and I'm asking you what you want.
See,
it's a slightly different mindset, I would say.
I've often thought of it in a certain way, in the reverse. Some of the most compelling art for me has been something which holds up a mirror and exposes something very uncomfortable about myself.
So it's challenging you.
It's challenging me, but it's not because it's, at least I get to the same place that you're describing. But when you say it's about bringing the audience to you as the artist and kind of hear me, but if the takeaway is they've actually made me think about myself, and maybe they've exposed something I'm very uncomfortable with about myself, or they've made me realize, I'm very underdeveloped in this particular line of thinking or whatever.
Sure.
Like it's really not about the artist very quickly anymore.
But it is about the
what they've
artist's
done to me.
statement. It is about their statement. A designer would welcoming you in and say, Austin, you seem like a really well-adjusted, chill guy. Do you want to sit in that comfy chair over there? Can I get you something? Like, that's the design mindset. It's a different... and to be clear, like, all of this is massively, massively subjective. Like, and I'm sure there's a million different
that's
views,
why,
but
yeah. That's why
for me, I wear both hats. When I'm making a game, I'm largely, I'd say my games are over 50% design, because essentially I'm trying to give the player an experience that's fun and entertaining, and then I'm sneaking in some opinions and some worldviews and some choices that are for me, that are kind of a creative choice and expression from me. But mostly I'd say my games are design, in that they are about trying to get people to buy them and play them and have a good time.
Do you think therefore that
you are?
the onus of iteration, of evolvement, innovation leans more on the artistic and the narrative side than it does the design side? Is the design side, it's like, we're not going to try to really advance this component. We're going to allow narrative and art style to kind of do the heavy lifting for that. Design is here to make sure that you can successfully experience this thing.
I think,
or is it I really want to shake up the way that we design?
I think all is valid. I think that goes back to the kind of, it depends what you're trying to do. I think ultimately they're using a lot of the same muscles creatively, to do both things. Like, the skills you're using to make something incredibly well designed and player focused are the same technical skills as you'd be using to produce art that expressed your opinion very well. I think those skills are interrelated. But I would say, actually, if you look at a lot of quote-unquote successful games, so games that have reached large audiences or have made lots of money, they generally choose their battles, and they generally go, okay, we're going to tell you a story about parenthood and loss, but it's a zombie shooter. You know what I mean? And therefore we're going to meet you on your ground. Or you go, we're going to make something innovative and fresh that changes the very face of gameplay, but we're going to say in kind of a sci-fi spaceship that's a bit like Star Trek. You know what I mean? Like, and you kind of, you do choose your battles, and you do choose, like, what's the area. I can't think of many games that are both innovative, like, design-wise and in terms of their interactions and what the game is.
A little bit of medicine, a little bit of sugar. You have to decide which one is which.
To me, you're trading that off at all times.
I feel like Inside is the quintessential example of one where the design and the narrative are the same thing. That it's very little of that vacillation back and forth that you're kind of hinting at. You know, like you said, it's a zombie shooter.
I would say Inside is definitely a very simplistically designed game, right? And to be clear, with utter respect, like, it's very well done, but, like, it is just moving to the side and jumping and some cool puzzles. When I say it's very well achieved, but it's not. I wouldn't say it was an innovative platforming game, right? Like,
what I think isn't like very smart about Inside's design is that it gives you very complicated puzzles with that very, very, very simple gameplay. So you're right that you are ultimately moving left and right, but there are rooms that you can enter where you have no idea what to do, even with the limited amount of controls that you can have. I always think about that part of the line where you're having to basically copy the person in front of you exactly in time. It's like, that's so simple. You know exactly what you have to do when you see it. When you're in that line, you know what to do, but it's just a tap of a button. And I feel like that's the genius of Inside's design, is making complicated things out of extremely simple controls.
And that's the thing, is when a designer...
They're telling their story. That's the part that I love. Like, what you're doing is how they are telling the story. That's what, to me, makes it, like, next level.
But the design, crucially, like, when a designer or a creative person in general says something simple, that's not a criticism. Like, there's an elegance and beauty or something that, like, I look up to anything that's achieving those things. I think it's a bit of advice I give to indie devs a lot of the time, is try and do one thing really well and start there. And then as you go through your career, you might be able to do multiple things, but, like, it's that conciseness of vision and objective. And I'm going to make something that's a crowd pleaser, or I'm going to make something that no one's going to like, but I'll say everything I think about this weird subject. Those are both equally valid kind of objectives to have. One has more commercial success likelihood than the other, but that's not the only metric for success on a creative work. If anything, it's probably the least interesting.
Do you also find that good examples of good design are the ones that do not require a UI in order to...
So I don't subscribe to that. I know lots. Okay. I know lots of people do, and I think it's an absolutely, again, like, these are all, like, valid objectives.
No, I'm asking you for your opinion, though.
I think video games are input-output systems, and therefore removing one of the key outputs, kind of, I think it's like being really, like, we've made this car. It doesn't have a steering wheel.
Yeah, but
okay,
like
but Mario, I have questions.
Inside, perfect example. There's no we're going to slow you down real quick. So
I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think that's I don't think a lack of UI is in itself, like,
a lack
thing.
Of.
Well, I don't think it's a positive or a negative. I think it's an aesthetic choice. I don't think it's noble to not have a UI, or that it's some kind of pure. I don't get more immersed in games that don't have UI. I've seen that said a lot in reviews and stuff, that, like, oh, this game doesn't have a UI, therefore it's really immersing me into the world. Most of the time when I'm playing a game without UI, I'm confused or missing information. There are exceptions. Inside's a good example.
I mean, I don't think Abzu has much
nor
UI.
Journey.
Yeah,
so it's like, it's
Journey doesn't
something...
even really have a pause menu. I mean, it's just like, just play.
Yeah, I feel like I would agree that it's an aesthetic choice, and it can be, like, a good aesthetic choice, but I don't think that it makes it any better than games that don't have UI. And I wanted to jump back to Dark Souls, when you talk about things that it does that are complicated and things that it does that are simple. Narratively, a mess. And I will not take any counterpoint to that, internet.
There are people who love that,
watch,
though, right?
Yeah, you can get into it. But if I have to watch a 3-hour video to understand your narrative, it's told in a way that's inefficient. But that's a choice that they made. The menu systems can also be a little bit convoluted. There are items that you can get that you don't know what they do, that you need to get to a certain point that will do something. You have no idea what any of this stuff is. But the actual combat itself in Dark Souls is so simple. And that's why it works. Everything else around it is very complicated. Yeah, it's just so precision based. It's just a matter of figuring out, what does this boss do when I get to it? Here are the same map of controls that I have with whatever weapon I've specialized. How am I going to approach this fight? That is such a simple thing that is just the through line of Dark Souls.
And if you couldn't rely on that, then they'd lose you very quickly.
The only time it's a problem is when the camera screws up in those games. Like sometimes the camera's bad in Sekiro, and when the camera's bad in Sekiro versus the camera being bad in Darksiders is a, oh my god, I hate this. But it happens in a few fights. But generally, very complicated game, very simple driving mechanic, which is the reason people.
But where it gets mind-blowingly weird is when you realize that there are games with what would arguably be described as bad game design that is the reason for their success. And the best example I have of this is Minecraft. Minecraft doesn't tell you how to make anything.
No Man's Sky?
Specifically I'm calling out Minecraft because they don't tell you how the crafting system works in game. They probably do now, but when that game first came out, they do on, okay. When it first came out on PC, when it first came out on PC, there was no information in the game. There were wiki pages, but there was nothing in game. And what that did was it forced everyone to talk about it. And it encouraged this community, and it built up. And I think there's a really strong argument.
Was that by design, though, or was that by omission?
I think a lot of things in Minecraft weren't by design, but it worked out. Like it's arguably the design strength of that game.
What if we just said Windows 98 and just we're done? What if we just aesthetically made it look intentionally bad? It was like,
you can point to that decision. I know games designers who've intentionally not put tutorial in their games to try and encourage the same behavior, to basically go, here is a game that you're going to have to go out into the community and find out information about and share, and like people will have put social capital on being the expert in how to do things, and that encourages those communities. And you see that a lot with the games that do very well with online and with community stuff. They're incredibly obtuse, and they encourage players to go out and have conversations.
It's an interesting thought because, in theory, bad design, which, like, I'm sure when you say it that way, it's like what you were taught at school, can become a positive.
Absolutely.
By virtue of the sense of discovery.
Banned. Yes.
Yeah, but that's the thing that I loved about Minecraft when it first came out, ages ago. I feel like it was a whole other lifetime. I still worked at McDonald's when I was playing Minecraft. It was like, 14. That I didn't know what things did, and as I discovered those things, I was amazed. And you could argue that, like I said, that's bad design that you would not be taught at university, but it's part of why I loved it so much.
That takes us back to what I said right at the start, right? Is in video games, often the best design. Basically, you could design the fun out of any video game just by making if you made the UX experience of any video game perfect, there wouldn't be a video game left, because the gun would shoot itself. The character would run forward, because we'd optimize out all of the friction and the noise and the busyness and the content. And that's what's really interesting about video game design is, yes, you're absolutely right. Minecraft with a tutorial that explained every single crafting mechanic to you before you needed to do it, and you were just going through a checklist, would be a worse game.
It does do that in some versions.
It does that on console. Fair enough. Then I'm not knocking that.
I don't think you have to do it.
Oh, that's good. But yeah, I think video games occupy this really interesting space where we're making imperfect systems for you as a player to fix, and that's pleasurable. As a player, you enjoy fixing our system and figuring out how to make things work. There's a really good school of game design theory, which is exactly that: is games are a beautiful machine with a cog taken out. And your job as a designer is to create the machine around someone, but make sure that they can place their cog in the middle of it and switch the whole thing on. I think it's an interesting kind of metaphor for how we work. Because I've done that before when I've worked on prototypes, where you realize you've made something that's beautiful and interesting, and when players watch someone else play, they think it looks great. And the second they get their hands on the controller, it's boring because it just kind of plays itself, and it removes the content.
I think that whole... I'm still very preoccupied by your thought on the sort of the player expectation component to all of this, and the idea that we're in this kind of dance of subverting or undermining their expectation in one moment and also giving them exactly what they want. Like I think that Dark Souls is an interesting example, because if they made it easier, it ceases to be what defines it. So it would broaden the audience while losing its core audience, basically, while losing its and losing the audience that it's clearly primarily designed for. I even watched a YouTube video analysis of specifically, that genre, the Souls-like so-called genre, of saying how they make this conscious effort, the conscious decision to make peace with and be okay with sacrificing a wider audience in favor of a deeper experience for this audience. Like that's just clearly part of the calculation, because you can't mainstreamize it, and that like to the extent, and that's just part of the design sort of ethos.
And isn't that interesting though? Like in terms of like how in the video games world, that's a controversial opinion. You know, we wouldn't think that if a film director, if Scorsese, and he does often make comments like this in public, right? If Scorsese said in public, my films aren't for everyone. They're, I'm making them for the people I make them for, and I'm not going to make my stuff more accessible. Even I'm not using that word in the kind of the sense of controls, but like in terms of people being interested in a film, we wouldn't blink. We wouldn't think anything of that. But because games are design, because games are products that are to be experienced by people in a very direct way, there is an expectation. And when I hear people talk about Dark Souls and say like there can't be an easy mode because they'll ruin the experience or whatever for some players, I feel uncomfortable with that statement. I'm like, well, that sucks that we can't let more people in. That feels like surely there's a way of doing that. And that's something I would never say about, I'm trying to think of an example of like, a particularly pretentious movie that I enjoy. Like I would never say like,
Vanilla Sky.
But I also think it's
Vanilla
interesting
Sky,
how
there you go.
our bar for these things moves. This is kind of related also to something I was going to bring up when we were talking about, is it art, is it not art? Because sometimes things that are very challenging in whatever particular way we're defining it, over time, because the bar is moving, suddenly now a thing feels very pedestrian, which at the time, shook the world apart. You know what I mean? I mean, that's kind of the pattern, right? That's sort of the whole point of challenging things, is so that eventually you kind of age yourself out as being a front line.
And you watch Citizen Kane and it feels cliche because it just set up so many things that now have become the norm in how films are made, right?
Yeah, I to that end, I was watching one of these game maker toolkit type videos the other day, and they were talking about the moment, this is a spoiler, in System Shock 2, so you've had, a 21-year-old spoiler or whatever. But there's the moment where, the whole game, you've been having this radio voice of someone talking to you, and then you come into this room and you find their dead body, and then the walls come down and Shodan reveals herself and says, haha, for it was I. And in the video, the guy was like, this was one of the most amazing moments I've ever experienced in a video game ever. And so I pinged Senor Levine about it, and I said, is this something that you feel particularly proud of still to this day? Like, is that one of the, because this guy's describing it like it changed his life. Yeah. And Ken surprised me because he said, internally, this was really controversial because the conventional wisdom is you cannot ever lie to the player.
Yeah.
And we've been lying to them up to the whole point in the game at this stage, and now we're pulling back the curtain and revealing it. And it was like, wow, what a little wonderful kind of microcosm of the evolution of the industry. Because to me, I wouldn't bat an eye about that if someone's like,
if anything, you would say that's a bit cliched, isn't that? Like at this point, right? Because it's been done so many times since. Yeah.
I think that to me it was so funny to imagine people arguing over like, we can't do this.
And art does transform into design over time. That's the other aspect that's interesting in terms of like you would things that you would consider design often kind of will take tropes from art movements of the past and commodify them essentially. So you'll find, if you go and, I don't know, look at the marketing here, Burger King, right, just rebranded with this new logo and font and shapes and stuff. The shapes and stuff. I'm a professional graphic designer. They just rebranded, and for them it's kind of this retro feel, and it feels kind of cozy and comfortable. But that's like a 70s outsider art style, and kind of it's based on kind of zines and poster art and kind of late psychedelia right into kind of 70s soul music kind of aesthetics that's pulling from, that were controversial art of their era that has now been commodified and turned into industrial design that's used to sell burgers to middle-aged people. But that's interesting, and that's something that this is all constantly in flux. We're also such a young industry, which I know is a cliche to bring it up, but like we don't know what's going to be the standard. We haven't had our Citizen Kane to make a big statement. We haven't found the reverse shot yet. You know,
I don't know if that's.
Yeah, I
Do
was
you
going to
not
say
agree with
I totally disagree, but I disagree on the premise that Citizen Kane represents the apex of the art form. When people say, like when The Last of Us came
Does
out,
it? I think Citizen Kane is the
Kane.
codification of an art form, right? Because Citizen Kane basically created modern cinema, or is the thing that people keep referring back to, right?
But it's
I
often
think for
spoken about.
1941, yeah, but I think that.
It's also spoken about as if
It's such a cliche conversation. I'm so sorry for introducing Citizen Kane into the conversation.
You invoked the name.
Well, but no,
This podcast was so good for so many episodes, and then I said Citizen Kane, and now it's destroyed.
No.
It's been, in other words, we had our Citizen Kane moment 20 episodes ago,
Exactly,
and now we've gone stale.
That was our Transformers the animated movie moment, the last work of Orson Welles. That's
Fair enough.
Great movie.
Yeah, no, I my simple contention there is that Citizen Kane is often spoken about as if we're supposed to accept that it's the best movie ever made. You know, AFI very famously declared it the best film of all time. And I think your point is far more on point, that it represents the modernization of the language of film and cinema and filmmaking techniques. More than it represents the apex of how to tell a story with film. But even then, all the overwhelming majority of great films were still ahead of us in 1941.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Better films, many better films, but that was kind of an interesting foundational work. And I think that's what's interesting with games, and why I work in games and not anything else, is because I think it's all to play for. I don't think anything's locked in yet. I don't think
we've got ages to go.
It's true. I
think we can genuinely like invent shit that defines the next 100 years of interactive entertainment if we are that smart and if we make something.
I couldn't agree more.
Every game is still Ocarina of Time or Half-Life. There's so much more that we can make that can be the next Ocarina of Time and Half-Life.
It's a wide open field. Whereas film, it's like, what are you going to do? Make the best film of the last 5 years? That sounds boring to me.
Just Citizen Kane again.
Well, that's where I think games also have an advantage, because what defines a game is so much wider than what defines a film. Like we have, like the sentence I always bring up is, you know, The Last of Us and Tetris are both video games, and there is no spectrum that wide in film remotely. You know, you've got the most art house film and the most commercial film mechanically operate the same way, whereas like the nature of your consumption is still the only breadth I could imagine is, you know, the difference between a long form TV show and a film is a different experience, and you tell a story over the course of several years versus over 2 hours, but it's still fundamentally filmmaking. Games offer, like you said, we haven't even invented most of them yet. The analogy that I like to draw is that games, as an industry collectively, we're like teenagers right now, where we're smart enough to be precocious and presumptuous and probably quite arrogant in our abilities, but we also don't think anything can hurt us. So we're just going into the world with this reckless abandon and wild inventiveness, because it's like, there's no rules, there's no norms, there's no standards and practices and things like that. Let's just fucking do it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm there for that.
I almost feel like we're a bit before that right now. I want more of that. Give me more stuff that actually uses the power of video games and
I don't think we're before that from the simple standpoint that teenagers can be smart enough to like, there are teenagers that could build a car, for example. Like they're like gifted mechanical geniuses, right? Like, so in other words, we're smart enough as an industry to know how to make viable, actual, really good shit in the way that a 10-year-old by comparison can't. That's the only distinction I'll draw there.
Do you feel this is an accurate statement to say that whereas
this statement is false,
fundamentally flawed, video games are the advancement is predicated upon tech, or it could be limited by tech. So therefore, a perfect example is, I remember when we finished the Sarah scene for the second time, Neil said, we're going to have to invent new tech to be able to, and they had to redness in the eyes from crying wasn't a thing for them. And so them being able to do that, they had to create tech in order to capture that performance. Film doesn't require the same, it doesn't have the same restriction, right? We don't need
It
a
did.
certain type. It can, like
No, but
special
it used
effects
to.
or whatever.
Like, listen to go read David Attenborough's book Life on Air. It's basically his memoir, and he talks about things like, when they were in the early days of the BBC, and the camera literally could not pick up anything below a certain threshold of light. So he goes, we were always sweating because we had these fucking bright lights on us because the camera could not see us otherwise. So it's like, so tech absolutely was informing the aesthetic that made them choose, because the early days of the BBC essentially defined how television is made for all the rest of humanity.
Sure.
And so the
Turret
choices they made
cams,
about
too,
like,
as
yeah,
opposed
like,
to like you pick 3
exactly.
lenses, that's all you got.
and
I
how far
generally-
away from the camera and all that kind of stuff was, so much of it was a function of just literally what can we work with? This stuff barely functions.
That's an interesting look. Yeah,
I generally
about
think
that.
you are super correct, though, Troy. Like, I consulted on a game last year where we wanted to have a city, but had to completely cut it because we didn't have the processing power for it. So it was like we just can't have this because the tech isn't ready. And having that conversation in, I don't know, June last year, when I was like, so you're telling me that there's a future somewhere where we can actually have a like extremely bustling million people New York City in a video game. It just could be 20 years away. We
Now,
can
here's the question.
eventually get there.
Was that a budget thing or was that a
No,
tech
it was
thing?
an actual tech thing.
Wow.
But I mean, in theory, you could say it's a
I'm
budget
gonna
thing
jump in
too.
there. Every budget and tech issue is both
Almost
at the same, time.
thing. So
you
we
could throw
could
money at it
have
and you could
made
get
the
the tech.
city bigger, but we would have had to have gotten rid of virtually everything else, and thus it's
Yeah.
a completely different video game. So technically, but I mean that those restrictions for budget are reduced the more processing power you have, and I think
like the
that's
tech-
so exciting.
It's the
The
whole
tech for
indie
facial capture.
scene exists because tech got good enough and the engines got good enough that we can make games with one or
And
two
the
people.
distribution, it should
Yeah.
be added.
Sure.
Yeah,
It's
of
the same
course,
thing
of course.
that changed like music forever, right? Is Napster was the proto for iTunes that fundamentally changed the way that the music scene worked. All of a sudden, you had these bands that were now on the same level as this, and you didn't need the major record labels.
There is
could
an
have
interesting upwards trend, though, in terms of like expectation versus. So it is with tech. This is, and I think it's across loads of things, but definitely with games. So I just said the statement like indie games happen when 2 people can make a game. 2 people can make a game is a really interesting metric to track over time, because in the 70s, 2 people was too many people to make a game, right? then you see things ramp up in the kind of the DOS era. You see things kind of jump up to bigger teams. Then you see it starts to diminish again once Windows development comes in. You see those numbers go down in terms of how many you need to make a game. Then you see it rise again. Then you see kind of Unreal and Unity kind of hit a convenience level that the small teams can work with, and it comes back down. So games are constantly kind of leapfrogging in that way. And arguably, we're entering into an upswing in terms of team size, where it's getting really hard to be an indie development team that's only a couple people nowadays, just because user expectations are so high. And the platforms that we're making games for are getting more complicated. And it will loop back down again. And it's kind of, so there is this kind of ongoing kind of arms race, and the user is a part of that, because the player gets to define kind of what's a game that's worth $20 is something that has also shifted all over the place over the years as well. So it's or $60 or $100, like these things move around so in so many ways. So yeah, it's a really interesting thing from that perspective, because you could model a city like New York with millions of characters walking around, as long as you weren't trying to render that in 3D on modern hardware, right? You could do that. You could do arguably loads of sim games do that. It's a really there's a whole other layer of this in terms of expectations and management of expectations and how we all kind of work within that framework. Sorry, I didn't really have a point. I just wanted to be boring for.
I want to.
Did I intro the show?
No.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Austin. Continue.
shit.
Go
I
ahead.
have 3 minutes, by the way,
Okay.
so let's do this.
We should probably intro.
I just wanted to, in the spirit of where tech informs design and where limitations actually yield something really special. I presume I'm just teeing you up to tell a story, Mike. But do you guys know what is essentially the accidental invention of video game difficulty curves?
Go for it. I've not heard.
Do you know
one.
this?
I think so.
I've not heard that story. No.
Really? It's very simple. I think it was the very original Space Invaders, the arcade cabinet. Because what happened was, you've got your little thing at the bottom that shoots the bullets up at the things coming down. And remember, everybody moves in slow. And what happens is the system was struggling to render all those, that as you killed them, it could render faster and it sped them up, which meant that the better you did, the harder the game got. And that was because the frame rate was improving as you killed guys, not because the game was designed to be harder, but they realized, oh, this is cool, let's keep it. And then everyone went, hey, it's interesting if games get harder if you're better at them. Let's make that a design idea.
Was Centipede the same thing then? Because the same thing happens with Centipede.
Probably, yeah.
Probably by that point it had become something they did intentionally. I've had that unintentionally. So obviously in game development nowadays, we try and stay independent of frame rate because that's just good programming. But sometimes an idiot like me makes a game like Thomas Was Alone and doesn't test it on any other hardware. And we had a fantastic bug in Thomas Was Alone, years before it came out, where basically if you ran it on better computers, gravity was stronger. Because I'd messed up and made it basically frame rate was tied to gravity strength. So when you put it on like a really good computer, you couldn't jump the gaps.
Impossible, yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That reminds me of. I remember
it was very socialist. It basically removed power from those with better computers.
Excellent.
And
playing the
those of us with the worst computers, we got to play the game. It was great. It was a real leveling of the playing field.
I remember having that happen on playing King's Quest 1, where you could change the game speed. And on the original computer I was playing it on, like a IBM 8088 or whatever, on the fastest speed, King Graham would walk like this. But then the game still worked on a generation later processor, and when you set it to faster, you'd go boom, and he'd fly off the screen so fast that you'd hit some cliff and fall to your death, and you would never even know what happened. And it was wow.
Unfortunately, there are still some games that do care about frame rate to that extent, which is why so many games are capped in terms of their frame rate, even on like classic games that you can't play on PC over 30 FPS. Often it is because those games would do exactly that kind of shit if you unlock them.
No way.
Crazy.
Yeah. Kind of weird.
All right, thank you, everyone. This is Play, Watch, Listen. I'm Nicole Kidman. That's Naomi Watts. That's Mike Bethel, and that's Austin Wintory. Before we go, I did have.
You gonna comment on Bethesda finally?
Let's talk about Bethesda. No, I can't show it to you guys, but I can show it to viewers. We have new merch.
What?
Hey.
It's this very cute.
Look at me feigning reaction to it.
Oh, it's so gorgeous! I love what they've done. Look at that.
Thank you.
That's gonna wear, look, feel, taste.
Yeah, that is exactly what I want to drink /
I'm really
wear.
banking on it tasting great.
Oh, it's going to taste brilliant.
So basically, an artist, he goes by Christian.dr Photography on Instagram, drew this. For your reference,
gorgeous.
It is me. It's a really cute cartoon of me sitting on a chair with fire around me, and I was like, I love this, and I would like to buy it, please.
Are we the fire?
We're the fire in the
I was going to say, it's just you.
You're always the fire for a producer.
Putting out fire.
But I loved it so much that I was like, can I buy this and can we sell it? So that will now be on merch launching today. I will leave a link in the description on YouTube. We'll post it on socials if you are an audio listener. All of our merch proceeds go to charity. We've been donating to the Innocence Project. And huge thanks to Christian. I'll also leave a link in the description to where you can find him. I just thought this was so cute that I was like, I would put it on a t-shirt. So check it out. Thank you guys for watching. We will see you all next week.
Bye.